Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to Pod TV Network. And we're going to be discussing the energy show. And with that, we have our energy expert who spends a lot of time in this area, and a show that's devoted to this area, which most people ignore. We'll bring in Peter Bennett. Peter Bennett, looks like you have a lot to discuss relating to the energy sector.
It's a busy show today. And I don't call myself an energy expert. You know, this is a spin-off of Wall Street Hackers. And right. I do study the markets a lot, but I've been interested in energy for decades, actually. And so I know a lot about it. Let me put it that way. But today's show, we're going to skip the energy news of the week, first of all, because this is a complex discussion we're going to have now, to say the least. And we're going to talk about two different questions. And one is climate change a real threat to the world? And that's a huge question right now. And two, should the developed world expect emerging countries to reduce their future energy use to help climate change? So first, we need to go into background for sure on this complex topic. Number one, I'm not an engineer and I'm not really a full energy expert. You know, anyone can go to the web, and I really suggest this. I don't want to offend anybody. You know, people are on both sides of this. Oh, climate change isn't a threat. I'm sure. Climate change is a threat. I'm sure. Well, this is complex, at least from my perspective. And I did a lot of work, preparing for the show, and I'm going to share some of it with you on the topic. But this is why it's complex. So if you have a strong position, either way, I say go to Google or search engine and look up the other side. If you think climate change is a threat, look up climate change isn't a threat. If you think it isn't a threat, look at a threat. I'm going to present some of the things I found. And, I'm a person who likes to look at both sides of all issues. And anytime an issue is this complex, it requires looking at both sides and at least consideration. So, number one, I'm going to look at some of the things I dug up about the pro position that climate change really is a threat to the world. Number one, we know that many studies are showing global temperatures have been rising. A lot of studies started in 1850, around there, and a lot of studies show maybe 1% to 2% increase in world temperatures, which over time will add up to a lot, obviously. Number two, and this is a big one, CO2, carbon dioxide. For 800,000 years, carbon dioxide in the world was pretty within a range. You could see it goes zigzag up, zigzag down, but very relatively tight range. I mean, it wasn't anything that broke the range that I could see in the 800,000 years. But then in 1950, all of a sudden, it started going out of the range, and it went really high. It went more than double. So in just 70 years, 72 years, whatever, since 1950, we have seen a dramatic increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and it's still going up. So that is aberrant from comparing to the 800,000 years. Next, we go to CO2 experiments in the labs. So this is a pretty basic experiment. They've done it many times. They put some air into a container. They shine some heat or light on it. Generate some heat, and then they see, well, the more CO2 we add, I think it's definitely correlated all the way up the chain. The more CO2, the more heat is retained in the container. So in labs, CO2 does not look like a good thing you want to double in the atmosphere in 52 years. So now we look at some arguments against it, and maybe one or two more than the other side, but that doesn't mean either side is, dominating the other side in terms of their logical arguments. So many studies over 800,000 years again show a zigzag in temperatures. And unlike in carbon, we're still within that same range. So it's not that aberrant. We have ice ages, we have heating periods, and we're within the range that it's always been within the 800,000 years, according to studies. We are on the other side on an upswing, but we're not even at the top of the range right now, but we are headed towards the top, but it's still a bit of ways away. That's the question. Another study said from 1942 to 1975, the world was actually in a cooling phase. I don't know if that to be true or not. That's what they were arguing. These are scientists writing this article. And they said carbon dioxide was already in the atmosphere long before that, in terms of the main increase in carbon dioxide was from the post-World War I industrial age. So we had a spike in carbon, and for a long, long time, we had some increases, but then we had a long cooling period with carbon already high, so it didn't correlate there. Another article argued that the world moved out of an ice age in the last 5,000 years, and the world's temperatures have increased by 4 to 7%. Again, that's that zigzag over 800,000 years. We've been climbing, but it's not like we've been climbing in the last 100 years, 200 years since industrialization. We've been climbing for a long time. Finally, in Crystal Bay, Alaska, people take cruises where a park ranger has said to me, I've heard it, he said, 300 years ago, you would have been under a mile of ice. And so you go, well, wait a minute, 300 years ago, there was a mile of ice, and I'm sailing along, and there are icebergs on the side, and they are calving, and it's an amazing experience. But then you say, what? This has been going on for 300 years, not 50 years or 100 or 150 years. So these are pretty decent arguments against it. So the other question is, should, and we're going to get into the discussion in a minute, but should the emerging countries be reducing their energy and not increasing it because they have been increasing it? And if you look at the forecasts for 2040, for 2050, natural gas use, oil use, you think, well, with all the solar coming on and all the wind coming on around the world, you would think that we're going to reduce natural gas use and oil use. We will be, according to the forecast, reducing coal, but substituting natural gas and oil. And still, so a lot of forecasts show perhaps flat oil use until 2050 and actually increasing natural gas use. Well, why is that? How could it be if they're adding so much solar and wind? Well, the developing countries need energy, and they're growing populations as the world is growing, and they are more access to energy for their transportation, for the heating and cooling of their houses, for their heating of their food. So that is forecast very likely, possibly, to offset any gains from wind and solar. So if you can think that climate change is a big problem, well, what do we do about the developed countries? So this is quite the dilemma. And Nick, if you'd come in, I'm going to ask you what you think.
What about the oil and gas and the energy?
Well, no, the two questions are, one, is climate change, and these are tough questions. You may not know the answers, but is climate change a threat to the world based on these different viewpoints? And also, should emerging markets countries be cutting back or not expanding their use of fossil fuels in order to help fight climate change? And if you believe it's a threat, then maybe arguably save the world or save the world economy, because that's what they've been doing. What do you think?
Oh, well, yeah, it is actually a threat. Anthropomorphic climate change is actually a threat to but it's a long-term horizon, and also it's more complicated than people think, which you said is correct. In other words, it's not like, okay, let's stop using oil and gas and we'll go to EVs. And what's pointed out correctly is
tomorrow.
Where do EVs get their energy from? Well, they got it from oil and gas. So what'd you do? You did nothing. Yeah, right. And they even did studies on it and said that you're actually going in reverse. Now, should we start working on developing alternative forms of energy? And the answer is yes, and we're already in progress. But it's a long term. The real problem, Peter, is we have these people, and I don't want to get into politics. I try to stay out of it. We have some people.
You can go into politics. We need to go into politics, but don't name names. It's like
you get some people that get on the bandwagon, like this lady from Sweden or Norway who came over here and said, "How dare you? How dare you? You're destroying my generation." And she's totally that did not offer a solution. That was not an intellectual conversation whatsoever. It was just somebody screaming about stuff. But she did get a lot of attention for herself.
Oh, she did, of course, from the press. Yeah.
Yeah, from the press, right? So it was good for the press, but not really good as a solution. But because it's in the public eye right now, there is work in progress to start using more of these alternative forms of energy and getting us off the coal, which is bad, oil and gas, which is not as bad, and natural gas, which is even less bad than that. But here's a problem that we have. It's an economic problem. And this goes back to our friends in Washington, D.C. They spent $75 billion on charging stations around the country. First of all, the U.S. government is broke, okay? We run huge deficits. We don't have money for Social Security. We don't have money for Medicare. They're running out of money in this decade and the next decade. So what was the $75 billion other than pork for EV? Number two, you have hybrids right now, which are very efficient. You don't need these charging stations. So again, this goes back to Tesla pork. And this is a real problem that I see, is that a lot of the money is being misallocated in that particular area. So I don't think the U.S. really has a very good energy solution. I did notice around here in the Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina area that we do have solar farms. The solar farms are usually done by the energy companies to reduce their energy costs. Yet, even with that happening, energy costs are going to go up 10 to 30% this year. So the people that are listening to this, and I've watched it on my bill, and you're going to watch it on yours, the cost of running your household is going to jump 10 to 30% this year.
Wow.
So it's something, I know, right? Yeah. It's like,
that's
wow.
Not good.
What?
That's not good for the economy at all.
No, it's not good for the economy, but the stats are coming out. And the oil and gas industry, like he's pointed out in the previous program, is not reinvesting and getting alternate forms of energy. Instead, they recorded record profits. So all these people that spent huge amounts of money on their gas bills because of, quote, crisis in Ukraine benefited the oil and gas industry tremendously, tremendous profits for them. And they're not going to use it to reinvest, but for the reasons you brought out. Why would they want to reinvest in a political climate that's going, you shouldn't have oil and gas, you shouldn't have, so they go,
well, you're right. Yeah, because you're right about that. I mean, they can't reinvest. If you don't have the land or you don't get the approvals for projects,
sure,
you can't reinvest. And I always point out that they are now using 10% of their budgets towards environmental projects. So a big one is sequestration, and then you need pipelines to sequester the carbon. So that alone, but that's 10% of their budgets that's not going to oil and gas productivity, and that's going sideways. And I always say too, if they're in a terminal business, which I don't think they are, then what do? You keep spending every dollar until you say, oh, your project's no longer needed. No, you return some dividends and you buy back shares, and you try to keep your business going. But that's all true, and you're right about that. But they are investing in technology, and that's an important point. But what about the idea that developed countries are absorbing a lot of the gains or all of the gains? Because what if they keep, if there's a climate threat, which I think you said there is long term, but these countries keep saying we need, which is reasonable, of course, they want heat for their houses, cooling for their offices. They want heat for cooking. They want transportation.
Right.
Now, they have a moral argument that say, well, if you developed countries have heat, air conditioning, cars, why can't we?
Exactly. Right.
But then the other side of the argument is, yes, but if you keep doing it, that is offsetting all the gains potentially from solar and wind for the next decade.
And that will continue to happen. That will continue to happen because you don't tell a starving person to worry about climate change. It'll take place 100 years from now.
You just hit one of my conclusions.
Which is the real problem. So, in terms of Gretchen going, how dare you? Okay, she's not starving. Her parents are extremely affluent, and now that she did that thing, she is too. But these people they live in countries where, like one country we're looking at doing some work in, you wouldn't believe the average salary. This is the average salary is $242 a month. Okay.
Right. So
Okay.
you know what?
So
If they go to $500 a month, they're going to use some of that money to heat their houses or
exactly.
eat
But
their
like I was
food.
saying, at $242 a month, if you can increase your standard of living because you're using
Right.
energy that's cheaper, you're going
Right.
to do it because you're living in a very really a very poor country. So
And that was, by the way, one of my 4 conclusions, which is it doesn't matter in a way what our opinions are. I mean, I hate to say that because it's not
Mhm.
like it's a relevant question, but
Yeah.
these countries are not going to stop. And not only do they want to help their people, but also think of the political pressures in these countries. You know, these countries, some of these countries might be subject to revolution. It's like, well, you're not letting me heat my house. You're not letting me drive a car. You know, you can't. They want to stay popular with their people. So the political pressures are huge in these countries and everywhere to say to not limit the spigot. So these countries are not cutting back. That's one of the conclusions, no matter what anybody thinks is right or wrong. And that is a dilemma for those who believe climate change, like you, it is an issue. And you know, the second of my conclusions is, and this is kind of antithetical to my second one, but I'll give you right now. First of all, weather patterns are very unpredictable, and I just want to mention this, you know, because I've heard a study that said that if you look out the window right now and predict that tomorrow's weather will be the same as today, you'll be more accurate than the weather forecasts. At least in one study said that. And we all know the weather says, oh, it's going to be 40 degrees and it turns out to be 70, or it's going to rain and it doesn't rain. It's an 80% chance of rain, 100% it doesn't. We all know. So if they can't predict in one day or 1 week accurately, sometimes they get it right, a lot of times they get it wrong. How can they predict in 20 years, 40 years, 50 years in these complex ecosystems? So that's one issue. On the other side, I have to say I am very concerned about the real possibility of climate change, because if you look at these CO2 experiments and the fact CO2 keeps going up, I mean, how much CO2 are we going to pump in the atmosphere? You know, I don't know, maybe it'll be a health issue at some point, you know, I don't know, but you know, are we going to continually keep pumping CO2 and wonder if these lab experiments are you know, real or not? So, but there you have to go take a step back and say, government policies are horrible. You mentioned that, Nick. And the thing is, not so you look at the 3 faults I have with government policies. I'll say this all the time. Number one, they attack oil and natural gas equally with coal. So they're trying to squelch all. So what happens in the last 2 years? Coal use goes up because there's not enough natural gas and oil. You have to prioritize. You know, natural gas is a clean transition fuel, no matter what you believe, and it's the cheapest fuel. So it should be an answer, at least a Band-Aid for the short run. Number two, we say, okay, you can't manufacture in our neighborhood, so send the manufacturing over to a country that has no environmental regulations at all, and that's okay. You know, so the environmentalists fight a manufacturing plant or a mine or a pipeline in the US as an example, or Europe, and it just goes to another country. They say, okay, well, we'll pollute your air for you and, you know, make money in the process and help deplete your economy. So that makes no sense. And then the third thing is just demonizing the energy companies. So my answer is, if we're going to get a solution, it very likely will come from technology. And who's the most able to create that technology? The people who have been creating the technology for decades. You know, I mentioned on the Wall Street Hackers the other day that in New Jersey, now you don't smell the pollution, petroleum that much anymore. A little bit on the 95, but it used to be terrible. That's technology. You know, they're doing sequestration of carbon where they're putting it under the ground. There's pipelines that are being built now to move the sequestered carbon, you know, and they're producing less pollution from the oil and natural gas. So should you be demonizing the oil and gas industry? Yeah, they're making more money than they used to. For a long time, they were getting slaughtered. You know, look at the energy stocks in 2015, 16, 17, after they overinvested. It's a historically cyclical industry, but we're in a very downturn in terms of productivity. which I showed on Wall Street Hackers. And this is going to cause astronomical damage potentially to the economy, giant, large anyway, where I don't know where oil, gas, and prices are going to go, but they have to go higher if we have undersupplies. And it's traditionally a very inelastic product, just like food, just like housing. This is built into the economy that, these are the inelastic things. People don't give up their cars very often, or if they do, they're not going to cut back a lot, and the same thing with food. So that's why the Fed has a big problem, which I don't think they're recognizing. And we went into that again on Wall Street Hackers. What do you think, Nick?
Technology improvements are going to be the only way out. Remember, the United States and China are the two polluters, and China pollutes more than the U.S. does. Well, they have more people,
and more every year.
More and more every year. But technological improvements, part of the reason I don't want to go to China is I can't breathe the air because But the thing is, technology improvements actually in the solar, wind, and hydro will, when they bring the economies of scale down, will be able to replace a lot of the carbon usage and fossil fuel usage over a period of time. When I say that, when I got a bid on my homeowners association to redo all of our roofs using solar,
right.
the first bid had come out $30,000. I thought it was too much. A year later, it came out to be $70,000. It's way too much.
Wait, it went up?
Yeah, it went up. It doubled and then some. I'm going like, okay, wait, time out.
Well, that's a good point too. Why did it go up, Nick? Do you know?
Possibly because of demand. There's a lot of people that are
demand, and also demand for lithium and silver and all the supplies.
Yeah. So the thing is, it's going up. But see, here's what ultimately is going to happen: the solar will go down, and so wind power will go down. Unfortunately, in our area, wind power may not work as well as solar. But there are certain parts in the country where the wind blows all the time. In the Midwest, wind power is great for them. As they improve the technology and drive the cost down on these technologies, you're going to see that's going to end up replacing a lot of the fossil fuels.
Oh, it definitely will.
Yeah, but it's going to take place over a period of time. And really, ultimately, that's probably what's going to happen.
Yeah, it's the only solution in the end because, as I said, you can't look. Our economies of the world, we live so well compared to what people did live, obviously 200 years ago, 300 years ago, 150 years ago, 100 years ago, whatever. All the advances are in technology and in energy. We now have an energy supply that powers the world. And you can't just say, okay, we're going to get rid of it. And again, we get back to the developed countries. So the only way that, since they're not going to stop as long as they can expanding their energy use, which again is more than reasonable. I mean, I don't think anybody who might even believe in the danger of climate change would be saying to these countries, stop, you don't deserve to have heat, but I do, so.
But if you look at sub-Saharan Africa, right, which I'm going to in a couple months, in Morocco, it would be natural to have solar power because
I agree. No, it's coming. Look, the technologies, the point, and the most important point I have is, finally, if you look at solar, it's such an exponential curve upwards in terms of, especially wind. I'm not so sure about it. It costs a lot.
Depends where you live.
And it takes a lot of energy to build a windmill too. And but solar will be so significant because you have an ever expanding upward curve, for efficiency. So solar will get us more and more power. Someday, maybe in 20 or 30 years, we'll have fission or fusion, or maybe 50 years. But this is a long-term way off in terms of climate change and the economies. And what are we going to be doing in the meantime? We have to have smart policies in terms of the economy and climate change. And right now, I think we have the dumbest policies on both sides, no matter what you believe. It's just incredible how Washington and the developed world is political and not logical. Right. So that would be our show this week. Thanks. You can tune in on Wall Street Hackers at 1 live and on podtv.tv is our new avenue, and also Roku and Amazon and whatever you're watching on, and 1:30 for the Energy Show. Thanks very much for watching.